Hello, 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 and welcome back to Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church of North Pratt Empowerment Hour. As always, we are so happy and excited to have you guys join us again today for another video. But before we get into today's lesson, I want to do two things. I want to wish you guys a happy Juneteenth weekend, as well as wish all of our fathers a very, very, very happy Father's Day. Now, let's get into the lesson. Today's lesson is Healed by Faith. And our Into Life and summary of the lesson for today will be given by Brother Earl Hilliard Jr., who is the teacher for the Young Adult Bible class. As always, we hope that you guys are liking our videos, sharing our videos, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. So let's get into it right now as Brother Earl Hilliard Jr. gives us our Into Life and summary of the lesson for today.
Good morning, Empowerment Hour. I am so happy to be back with you again on this wonderful Father's Day. I think I had the opportunity to be with everyone on Mother's Day and wish all the mothers happy Mother's Day. And now I have the pleasure of saying happy Father's Day. Let's talk to those fathers and give them the reassurance and thank them for all they do. Today's lesson is from Matthew chapter 9. 18 through 26 verse, and it is healed by faith. Healed by faith. Now, in this lesson, we're dealing with Jesus, and as Matthew tells us, Jesus is in his second year of his teaching. I want to start us off with the thought to remember: Jesus' power and authority are greater than the worst of our circumstances. Let's try that again. Jesus' power and authority are greater than the worst of our circumstances. Now, in this lesson study, we talk about Jesus and his special properties and what made him just great. And we've been to the doctor before and something's been wrong or something's happened and we've been trying to figure it out. And the doctor just can't tell you exactly what it is. Oh, the doctor may know what it is, but they may not know how to treat it. So what they do is they send us to what we call a specialist, someone who has greater knowledge, greater experience, and greater ability to help us with our problems. And this lesson study talks about Jesus being our ultimate specialist. He was better trained and more experienced in our situations. And this text challenges us and reminds us to put our faith in Jesus. Now, in this lesson, as I told you, Jesus is in his second year of training, and his teaching is based around the Sea of Galilee. That's where he is. He's been doing his mission. He's been fulfilling the promises. He has been healing people. His popularity is improving. His popularity is getting bigger. People are hearing about Jesus. Now, the problem with sometimes when you become notable at what you do is you do what we call upsetting the apple cart. And that's what was happening. Jesus was very popular. He was getting more and more popular as he healed people and he did things. But that made him polarizing. A lot of the religious leaders, people who had been in charge, people who had been the one that people looked to, were now uncomfortable with what Jesus was doing and what Jesus was representing. The leaders were mad that he was forgiving sins. The leaders were mad that he was associating with what they considered to be marginalized people. He was violating their traditions and things that they thought were just could not be violated. Things that they were talking, they had literally just had a discussion or an argument over Jesus's lack of fasting or him debating with them on fasting. But in our subject today, and what we're talking about, while Jesus is teaching, a grieving father who is described as a certain ruler. In verse 18a, it says, while he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshiped him. Now, what makes this important is here's someone that we know as a local Jewish leader, someone who had power, someone who is respected, and he came very humble to Jesus. He approached Jesus and he said to him, my daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her and she shall live. Now, let me tell you, isn't that powerful that somebody who has power recognizes this person in their second year of teaching, someone who is gaining power and authority? He comes to them humble and he says, if you just lay your hand upon her, she shall live. And that's important to say that in front of his friends, people who respect him, giving honor to who Jesus is. And in verse 19, it says, and Jesus arose and followed him. So did his disciples. Now, as Jesus is on his way, following this man, we hear about another situation. We call this the story interrupted, where another lady, this person has been what we call hemorrhaging or bleeding for years. She has suffered a blood disease and she has probably gone to different specialists, probably gone to people, but maybe not had the means or the ability to solve her problem. But she knows she has faith that Jesus can do it. So she's heard the stories about Jesus. She's heard the things about Jesus. And so she's like, if I can just get to him, if I can just get close to him, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, then I'll be healed. So she follows Jesus through a crowd, and it says in verse 20, and behold, a woman which was diseased with the issue of blood for 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. Now, this wasn't just something where her faith just cured her. When she touched Jesus, it said, but Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith has made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. He said, thy faith has made thee whole. So she touched the hem of his garment. Jesus knew, even in a crowd, that power had left him to go into her and to heal her. And these 12-year ailment had been healed. And she was healed. And Jesus turned around and said, your faith healed you. Now, I want to make this point because they made sure to talk about this. Sometimes when we talk about that statement, thy faith has made thee whole, sometimes people feel like, well, that means that when they pray to God or when someone else prays to God and someone's not healed, that means that their faith wasn't enough. But what it says, it talks about effective faith. And in effective faith, it says, God's supplies will meet the real need regardless of whether or not a miracle is involved. So sometimes it talks about you may not get the miracle the way you plan to get the miracle. You may not get the healing the way you think. It's saying that in your prayer, in your faith, you trust that God will handle the situation in the way that the situation is meant to be. So it doesn't mean that your faith is lacking. It just means that God had another plan for you or for the other person. So on the way, the young lady is healed, and then they go to the Father's kingdom. They go to his house, I guess you'd call it, and he walks in, and it says in verse 23a, and when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making noise, he said unto them, give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. Now, you know, when we declare things, when God declares things, sometimes people don't understand his power. People didn't understand Jesus' power because they know what dead is, or at least they think they know what dead is. And it says in verse 24b, and they laughed him to scorn. Basically meaning that they debased him. They talked about him. They laughed in a way in which they tried to diminish his power because they didn't understand his authority. We talked and said Jesus' power and authority are greater than the worst of our circumstances. He healed the lady in the crowd that ran through and touched the hem. And now these people are laughing at him because they don't understand his power. They don't have the faith that this father had. And it said in verse 25, but when the people were put forth, he went in and took her hand, and the maid arose. I need you to go back and realize Jesus' power and authority are greater than the worst of our circumstances. Our faith will keep us whole. Our faith will heal us if that's what's in God's power. But we must have faith. In these two situations, it was the faith, one of an individual and one of a father for someone's individual, that healed them and made them whole. But it was the power of God that actually allowed. It was Jesus' power and authority that allowed it to happen. And lastly, in verse 26, it says, and the fame hereof went abroad into all the land. So these things don't happen in a vacuum. People knew that she was dead. This was a ruler's daughter. So all of a sudden, we now have this situation where someone's been healed and the word gets around. It becomes more popular. And it says this great miracle, the results of which were seen by many, could not be kept quiet. But Jesus realized as the word spread and as the crowds continued to grow that he needed more assistance, that it just wasn't enough of him to go around. He needed to spread the message. And it talks about him empowering his disciples. He sent his disciples out to declare the coming kingdom of heaven. So this was the initial missionary commission. He made them missionaries. He sent them out. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to tell the great news. We're supposed to tell the great word of Jesus. That's what Christians do. I want to thank you for being here on this great Father's Day, with this great lesson, Healed by Faith. And I want you to remember, once again, Jesus' power and authority are greater than the worst of our circumstances. Keep the faith. Have faith.